Corey Timmett made reference a few times early to the sustainability of the turnovers, which what's funny is that we're having the same conversation last week, in the week before, and the week before, and the week before, and the week before, but specifically last week before the Maryland game, talking about, well, is this sustainable? It wasn't just sustainable. It was increased exponentially to 7 turnovers against Maryland. I don't think there's any question that the rate of turnovers is higher than it usually is, but is it sustainable? Well, of course it is, because Iowa's been doing it for 20 years. So they obviously practice it, scheme for it, all of that. It's in their DNA.
Yeah, and the thing about it is early in the season, we had those conversations. I remember the particular live. It was going into the Kent State game, and you and I sat down during the middle of the week and just talked about Iowa's win against Indiana, Iowa's win against Iowa State. And, I kind of danced that line because, the homer in me wanted to believe that those kinds of numbers are sustainable. But I'll just be honest, for anybody that heard me, I was not very at the time. I was very doubtful internally. I really did feel, and I am sort of, I get very, I can be, if I'm not careful, I can become somewhat of a pessimist as it relates to Iowa football and expectations, because I think a lot of Iowa fans are that way because we have gotten burned in big games over the past, 20 years. But I'll be honest, you watch what Iowa did against Indiana, you watch what they did against Iowa State, you watch what they did against Maryland. Okay, now we've got three examples against every Power 5 team they've played where they've done the exact same thing. And that is not only forced turnovers, but forced turnovers at a high volume. Last week you have 6 interceptions, and they're all by different players. I mean, I don't know. I haven't looked at the numbers, or I don't even know how you'd research a stat like that, but I wonder when the last time that's happened in the FBS. That just doesn't happen. I was doing very unique things with this defense. Tom Kakert described last night on my show, Phil Parker is confusing the heck out of a lot of quarterbacks and a lot of offensive coordinators. And I'm not doubtful that James Franklin in this offense will be able to put up some points. But I'll be honest, I have not been a Clifford believer. I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten this year because it's just not a real strong year as far as a quarterback is concerned. I mean, Don and I were running through this last year. Like, who do you put ahead of Clifford? Maybe CJ Stroud. McNamara's been okay. Adrian Martinez may even be in the conversation. But when's the last time we've even considered putting a guy like Adrian Martinez, who's got a team that, can't beat anybody besides Northwestern, in that conversation? So I'm not a big fan of Clifford. And even though he has the ability to get the ball downfield, he has shown over the course of his career that he is liable to make a mistake at some point. I mean, he just is. Last year we saw it. I know they were a different team last year, but we saw that against Iowa last year. I don't know how many turnovers. Don't have that stat in front of me, but that game, certainly the memorable interception was the Davion Nixon return, and then the Euro step return for a touchdown in that game. So I see Iowa forcing turnovers. They've got too many guys. I mean, you look at that back end, and I said it going into the season. What normally worries me about this defense, because Phil Parker's defenses, let's face it, they're always good, like Mark said. But what's different about this season, and I saw it heading into the year, is they are not weak at either cornerback spot. And typically, I could name a handful of games where Iowa's had a very solid defense, but you get into these games where you actually have problems stopping. Purdue, Jeff Brom has been great at taking advantage of this issue at Iowa, because Iowa typically has one elite corner and then one guy that's okay. And because of Iowa's, Phil Parker doesn't like to send the guy from the wide side of the field to the short side of the field and switch back and forth. And so you just line up your best receiver on Iowa's weak side of the field and burn them time and time again. But Iowa doesn't have that issue this year, because I think Riley Moss and Matt Hankins, I think Hankins is slightly better, but they're both solid. And then you have a guy, we saw Terry Roberts really take a step forward last week. And Kirk basically said during his weekly press conference that the guy's a starter and he's just on the bench because he's got 2 pros ahead of him. So I don't worry so much about. I don't worry nearly as much as I have in past years. Again, Dotson still scares me because he's just that good. I think he's number 1 on Todd McShay's big board for wide receivers, so that tells you something. I would rank him ahead of Freifogel. I'd rank him ahead of the guy Demas. I don't know if I'd rank him ahead of Bell, but he's definitely right up there for best in the Big Ten, one of the best in the country. So, it's going to be interesting to see if they can hit that big play. I mean, that's just, again, it just seems like this series always comes down to that. And I think back to another game that stands out in my mind. 2018 was a year where, you have another rainy game in Happy Valley, which it seems like every time Iowa plays Penn State there, it's raining or it's, misting or whatever. And it came down to the end of the game, which it normally does in this series. Nate Stanley throws a terrible interception, probably a bad play call on the part of Brian Ferentz, and that kind of sealed the deal. But again, a low-scoring game. I think back to a play in that game. Had T.J. Hawkinson, no one around him, 10 yards down the field on a play-action throw from Nate Stanley, and Nate Stanley airmailed it. The difference this year is Spencer Petras is not overthrowing deep routes. He's hitting wide-open receivers down the field. So there's just a lot of reasons why I'm more confident in this game than I was last week, but I guess those are a few.
And Corey's comments about Sean Clifford earlier brings me back to, I wanted to answer one of the questions. I forget it was from some guy named John, but he was asking what's the difference in Sean Cliff, like how's he improved this year compared to prior years, and is he still a threat to run? I think that was a question. But the first part, I think the biggest difference is Mike Yurcich. I mean, the system that he brought in, which was highly successful at Oklahoma State, where they averaged over 40 points per game just about every year. That they bring that same system, and he and Yurcich, I think Yurcich's done a great job of, I guess, giving him, getting him to go through his checkdowns, or giving him a. I guess I've seen some like videos of him, but he teaches his quarterbacks how to, based on how they read the safety, however they're lined up, they know which receiver to go to. But even more importantly, though, Cliff has clearly learned from looking at games like how to check down if his primary receiver is covered. In years past, I know Marty and I have talked about this ad nauseum on our own post-game shows this year, but when we're admiring how Cliff has improved. But, the big thing is in years past, Cliff would be looking, his primary guy was covered. He would, or if he felt any sort of pressure whatsoever, he would just take off and try to run, and then could sometimes get himself into trouble. Or he would scramble and then maybe just force a pass somewhere to end up as an interception or pick six, instead of just, throwing the ball away. He's just done a much better job nowadays of, staying in the pocket, just looking, if his primary guy's covered, he'll look down, and he's done a great job of identifying, his checkdowns, and usually one of them ends up being open to throw it to. And so, he'll do that. Now, can he still use his legs? Oh, you bet. He showcased that last week, even this past week against Indiana. I can remember one play especially. I think Micah McFadden, Indiana's star linebacker, was just racing towards him, thinking he was going to get a clean hit on him, and then Cliff just kind of sidesteps in the pocket and then just decides to take off up the middle, which is, they cleared the way for him. But he did that a few other times during the game. So, if Iowa's gonna, obviously I'm sure they're gonna bring some pressure, but if they're gonna do it, they need to be disciplined. You got to make sure, you better get to him, because if you don't, he's gonna have a lane to run through and pick up that first down. So they very much still have to respect the run with Cliff, even though he's become a much better pocket passer. And I will say the other part too is, I know Marty and I, we've harped on, the run game, how run blocking has been lackluster so far, but the pass protection for the most part, it's been pretty solid. They've done a great job overall of protecting Cliff, and that's also helped him out, as far as being able to stay in the pocket and look to his checkdowns. So I'm gonna be curious to see if that pass protection can keep it up against this Iowa front seven this weekend. If they can look like the way they did against Auburn, which also had a solid front seven. If they can do that too. I mean, I do like Penn State's chances in this one, and I would be very careful about thinking that the Sean Clifford that's coming into Iowa City this Saturday is the Sean Clifford circa 2020 or 2019. This is a different Sean Clifford than what Big Ten fans have been used to.
Yeah, absolutely, Tim. Sean has come a long way this year, and that the biggest difference is whenever his main guy isn't open or he feels some pressure, some heat, he doesn't tuck and run. He'll still use his legs to keep the play alive and to move around in the pocket, but he's finding other receivers, and we're seeing that this year with Penn State. We're seeing Parker Washington, who had a really good freshman year last year, but continued to have a big year as a result. Keandre Lambert-Smith has emerged as a big-time deep ball threat, big play threat, because Cliff is keeping plays alive, allowing him to find these guys. Check downs to the running backs this year, especially John Lovett in the passing game, has been big because of him taking those strides. And like you said, if a defense, they drop 6-7 guys in coverage and they get too far forward on their pass rush, Cliff will still gladly tuck it, take 12 yards, take that easy first down, and move the sticks. So I think I know we're really harping on it in the show, but I feel like anyone who's watched Penn State football the last 3 years will attest to it. Just he has grown so much, not just from last year, but even from 2019 Clifford, who was much better than 2020 Clifford. 2021 Clifford is head and shoulders above 2019 Clifford. This is a totally different Sean Clifford. And I think he is not just he's raised his floor and ceiling as a quarterback, and as a result has raised the ceiling of the 2021 Nittany Lions. And in my opinion, the play of Clifford combined with this defense has made them a legitimate college football playoff contender.
Excellent resumes. I do have a trivia question, if you will, Mark. If I can ask this question, and you can answer it because you're a savant as it relates to the Big Ten football, or Marty or Tim can answer this question. So based off of, and again, this is a mixed bag because of what we've seen. I think most people understood the stat early, but if you had to guess where Iowa stands in total offense, okay, so total yardage offensively in the Big Ten, where did they rank?
I'm going to write a number down.
I saw this earlier today.
Okay.
At least I believe so. If I remember correctly, I saw that they ranked last in the Big Ten in yards per game.
They rank last. Now, good job, Marty. Where does Iowa rank in points per game in the Big Ten? They rank last in total offense. Where do they rank in points per game?
Scored by their offense?
Or just scored in general? Yeah.
Well, I guess I don't. Maybe I'm wrong. That's how it's measured. I think it's measured just off of points.
It is.
So,
but I was just making the point.
Yeah. But no, well, that's part of what my point is, Mark. But where do you think Iowa ranks in points per game?
Well, they've scored 34, 27, 30 against Kent, and what was the other game? 51.
And so they hung a 50 burger on Maryland.
Third.
Any ideas where they rank in the Big Ten?
Second.
I would say no.
They rank fourth. Okay. They rank fourth. Now, again, you're right, Mark. A lot of those points have been scored by the defense, or a good portion of those points have been scored by the defense. A good portion of those points have been scored on short fields. But again, if you can make the argument, and I think you can now because we've seen it over the course of numerous games now, that the turnovers are, for a large part, sustainable. That's the stat that matters, Hawkeye fans. That's the stat that matters. If I was putting up more points than the other team, they're going to win games. So I was really reading into the total offense early in the year too. But again, if you think about it, and I'm not saying Iowa's offense has been a world beater, but you take what the defense gives you. If your defense is consistently putting you at your opponent's 20, then you drive 20 yards for 7 points. I mean, and that counts against your numbers, I guess, if you're ranking, you're comparing them to other Big Ten teams, but that's still the stat that matters. So This past week made me a bit more of a believer in the offense. And not only that, but we also saw a big jump. And this is also, I give you credit, Mark. You predicted back in the spring that Spencer Petras would be one of the more underrated quarterbacks, would make a big jump, I believe. I could be wrong. Maybe you're going to tell me I'm wrong. But you kind of had
I'll
him
take credit for that. Sure.
As an underrated guy. And early on this year, that prediction was not looking good. But, man, the guy looks like a different guy. At least he's two games. I mean, I wasn't a believer after Colorado State because it's Colorado State, but these last 2 games, he has looked like a different quarterback. So I'm a bit on the bandwagon right now with Spencer, and that along with, again, what the defense has been able to do to get Iowa's offense in such a great position consistently. I'm not that worried about Iowa's offense. I do think it's going to be a low-scoring game because Penn State's defense is legit. Very, very rarely, I shouldn't say never, I very, very rarely in my lifetime have ever called for a quarterback to be benched, including when Ricky Stanzi threw 5 picks against Indiana in 2009. Most fans, and it makes sense why, they were calling for him to be benched. He came back, won the game. But I was, at one point last year, calling for Spencer to be benched. Not done that since then, or since really the Illinois win last year, because I think ever since then, and again, these first 2 games, I think that's one thing people have to realize. Iowa State's defense is still really good. I know they lost to Baylor. If you look at their defensive numbers, they are pretty darn good nationally. And then Indiana, I mean, their defense is holding its own right now. I mean, Cincinnati, I don't know how many points they give up against Cincinnati, but I mean, a lot of those points against Iowa, again, were defensive points. And for an explosive offense that Penn State has, 24 points when you're playing from behind the entire game, I feel like that's impressive. So I think those first 2 games were a lot to do with Spencer Petras struggling. I do think I don't know what Penn State, I know last year or 2 years ago when Iowa played Penn State, Tim, Iowa had problems protecting Nate Stanley because Robert Windsor was just destroying Iowa's interior time and time again. 1 week after Don Brown's Michigan defense did the same thing. So that's better this year. I think Iowa will protect better. I don't know. I know they don't have Robert Windsor anymore, but that will be key. That Iowa's in the interior of Iowa's line is obviously a lot better than 2 years ago, and they held up well last year as well. Of course, again, COVID year, so you can kind of throw some of that out. But what I guess from Marty or Tim, as far as or Penn State's defensive line, I think that will be key. I do believe Iowa will be able to protect Petras, but what does PSU's defensive line look like as far as pass rushing?
Well, I guess a name you may want to remember for Saturday is Arnold Buchetti. He is a Temple transfer, grad transfer from Temple, and he's easily the best addition Penn State has ever made from the transfer portal. Just an absolute beast off the edge. He blocked a field goal against Wisconsin, the season opener. And he does a great job of just, shedding blockers, just getting pressure on the quarterback. He's garnered a few sacks already this season. I remember he got a nice sack on Jack Tuttle right after he came in to replace an injured Michael Penix. And, the crowd just erupted. I mean, he's a guy who can really, he can make those kind of game-changing, momentum-changing type plays that will get the rest of the defense fired up. On the other side, you got Nick Tarbird coming off the edge. Adisa Isaac, guy who was expected to start there, got injured in the preseason and is out for the year. So Tarbird has stepped up, as a guy look out for. In the interior side, you've got PJ Mustipher and Devon Elliott. This other Devon Elliott has been stepping up lately as well. I'm sure Marty, you can add a little bit to that if you want.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it starts with AK. Arnold Buchetti. I have his stats here so far this year. He already has 3 sacks, 5.5 tackles for loss, and I think anyone who's watched Penn State would agree with me. It feels like he has a lot more than that because he's constantly in the backfield, constantly harping on the quarterback, constantly building plays up. And one other guy on the defensive line definitely want to watch, I think, is Jessie Lucetta. He moved from Mike linebacker now to defensive end this season, and largely because of the Isaac injury. And Lucetta he's been a godsend at defensive end. He doesn't have a sack this year, which really surprised me. I thought for sure he would. Because, again, he's a guy like Buchetti. I feel like if you watch the games, Lucetta's always blowing plays up in the backfield. He's got 3 tackles for loss, but I think that combination of AK and Lucetta off the edge are going to be difficult for any team to handle. Burton's a guy I've always liked too. He's finally healthy, playing well. And at least in the interior, PJ Mustipher is playing at an all Big Ten level. Devon Ellis has looked good. And Derek Tangelo has really, another grad transfer who came in from Duke, has really raised the level of this Penn State defensive line as well. And I think one other guy to watch in the pass rush non-defensive line is linebacker Brandon Smith, who's playing at an All-American level, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And Iowa fans are familiar. Yeah. He is partially Iowa fans are familiar with him because he shares the name of one of Iowa's best receivers last year, Brandon Smith. But yeah, no, there's no question. That's one thing that I think heading into this game that I am not comfortable with still with Spencer is his ability to step up in the pocket, make a play, and maybe take a hit. Again, I think back to 2019 and Nate Stanley's issues. Of course, that was obviously an offensive line issue, but he had the innate ability, no pun intended, innate, if you didn't catch it. He had the innate ability to basically have guys hanging off Nate Stanley as he threw. He, for being a big guy, had a nice spin move out of the pocket. Spencer Petras drops like a fly on a moment's notice. So if there is any pressure, that pocket collapses. I don't have faith in Spencer getting out of the pocket, although he's improved getting out of the pocket early, but when he's under pressure, he is very limited. He's one of the few quarterbacks in college football now, especially in the Big Ten. He's one of the few quarterbacks that is a statue. And that's just what CJ Beathard was semi-mobile, but before CJ, it was probably Brad Banks would be the last guy that was real mobile at Iowa as a quarterback. Drew Tate was okay. So that will be a factor if Iowa is not able to protect Spencer. And we saw it in the Iowa State game, taking sacks at bad times. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's corrected that error. But, man, that almost killed Iowa in the game. It took points off the board because, you're at the 30, 35-yard line repeatedly taking sacks on 3rd and long. So you hope Spencer's learned from that if you're an Iowa fan. But certainly and I said it last week against Maryland. Maryland wasn't able to do it, but I said that was a big key. If you get him into 3rd and long and you can get pressure on Iowa, which, again, Don Brown has done it, Penn State's done it, confuse Iowa's blockers up front, that's going to be another big part of this game if Spencer Petras can react in a way that, again, is not going to cost his offense.